Children are born sinners. That's the idea, is that because we are born with a sin nature, a fallen nature, dead spiritually. That's the idea. Because we do not have the Holy Spirit's influence in us, we don't have the rebirth, because we have to be born, then reborn, being born again, as Jesus says. This all is playing in, all this theology plays in. The idea that we are born sinners, and that's why we sin. If we didn't have this sin nature, we wouldn't sin. And one day we won't have that sin nature. That's the thing we're looking forward to. We long for when we get new bodies that don't come with the sin nature. And so that when we rule and reign with Christ, when we move on into eternity, we won't worry about sinning because we won't have this inclination in us anymore. We don't have to be like Paul in Romans 7 where he says, man, oh wretched man that I am, right? He gets so frustrated because he knows what he ought to do and he's not doing it. And he knows all the stuff he's not supposed to do, but he finds himself doing it. So we're all sinners. Even your cute little babies are sinners. And as they get older, they develop the ability to manifest sin. They show, they make it more evident. And little kids, they're just little sinners. And so God, let's flip to Hebrews chapter 12, because really parenting is a lesson. We need to understand this. This is basic, bedrock, foundational theology and philosophy to how and why we parent. We do not parent to make our lives easier. We do not parent just so that our home flows better and I don't have screaming and I don't have things breaking and it's clean. That's not the main reason. That's a fruit of good parenting, but that's not why we do it. We do it because our children are on loan to us from God. They are our kids, but they were his kids first, and they'll forever be his kids. And so he wants us to train up his kids as he would train them. And our goal is to release those children into the wild someday, knowing how to obey him. And if you're a believer, you should know the pain that comes with disobeying God, the pain associated with sin. If you've ever been addicted to drugs and alcohol, you know the hurt it caused. And so you would never wish that on your kids. If you've been addicted to pornography and to lust, if you've been used by men and you understood that you gave yourself away and you found out that you were just being used, you don't wish that on your kids. And you know also that obeying God blesses us and gives us blessings. And you want your kids to experience those blessings. And so the goal is when they leave your authority, that they're fully ready to be under his authority. That's why we parent. Now, God, it says, right? It says in Hebrews chapter 12, he speaks to you as sons. Verse 5, my son, do not despise the chastening, that's spanking right there, of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you're rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, he spanks. That's the idea. And scourges, that's like whipping. Every son whom he receives. And if you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons, right? And then it goes on saying, if you don't get chastened by God, then are you even his son? It's a good question. But down in verse 11, it says, now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Exactly. Discipline, chastening, it can come in different forms. It can come in a variety of forms, and I'm open. There's the obvious biblical teaching that I don't think we should really veer much from, but there's other outside of the box things too. But all of them must be painful, unpleasant. Your kid cannot walk away from discipline like that wasn't a big deal. Like, no, it has to have, because it's supposed to train you that sin is painful and sin brings pain. That's the message you're trying to teach your kids. Sin brings pain. Disobedience brings pain. And if they can learn to obey you in simple and menial things, hopefully they'll learn the lesson there rather than learning the lesson later on in life from God where they experience real pain. Wouldn't you rather have your baby, and I mean baby, learn that when you say no because they're grabbing for your necklace and you just give them a little flick on the wrist. Now with a little baby, that hurts. And they go, ah, they cry because you hurt them. But they start realizing every time mom or dad says no, and I keep doing what I'm doing, it hurts. And hopefully they learn that young. When they're older, they'll know it. As teenagers, they already believe. When mom and dad tell me no, it's because if I do the opposite, the result ends in pain. And then when they go free, as adults, they learn. When God says no, if I do the opposite, it always results in pain. Now, I will say Psalm 119, 67, and 71 are great cross-references. I don't think we have time right now, but before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. It's good for me that I've been afflicted, right? David, it's good that this pain has come because now I've learned. Now, back to verse 15. We laid some groundwork that was so important. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. So we need to understand right off the bat, your child is a sinner from the beginning. They are sinners. And parents, or soon-to-be someday parents, or grandparents, you can still teach your kids, you can still teach your grandkids. If a child disobeys you in any way, shape, or form, it is sinful. And it deserves chastising. It deserves discipline. We know that when the Bible says to do something, it is a command, not a suggestion. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Honor your mother and father is the 10 commandments. But even as a child now, if you live at home, I don't care if you're 23. If you live at home, Enrique, your parents live at your home. You can pray about that. If you live at home, or they did, then you're a child in the Bible. I don't care if you're 17, you're 19, you're 25. If you're choosing to live at home, you're under your parents' rule. And if you disobey your parents, you are deserving of discipline. And again, it might change with a 20-year-old than what it looks like with a 4-year-old, obviously. But painful. The consequence must be painful. It must hurt. Now, physical pain is one, but you also know that it hurts having things taken away. And again, there's other doors you can open up as the Lord leads. But for the most part, if you do this right as a little child, then you don't need to do it as much with big children. And so the idea is that children are sinners. We need to realize that. And when they disobey you, it is always sin, and it's never cute, and it's never funny. Disobedience is sin, and it's our job to represent God, to be his ambassador, to teach them disobeying the Father results in pain. And so it says the rod of correction will drive it far from him. This talks about discipline, spankings. That's the idea. Now, with little kids, it changes. And I don't feel qualified to give advice, especially over a video, not one-on-one, not talking to you about your kids. But what I can say is spanking is biblical when done biblically. I've done other longer teachings on this. This is going to be semi-long, but, and I don't have, why didn't I not write cross-references in here? That's not helpful. I'm trying to think. You guys probably know it faster than I do. It's actually, I think I need to back up. But I can quote it to you word for word. If you beat your son with a rod, he will not die. Love that verse. Because it sounds so in your face for the 21st century. But in reality, it has two important truths woven into it. If you beat your son with a rod, he will not die. Now, we have to understand that everything from knocking out an enemy with a club to a swat on the rear with a little stick, in the Hebrew, it's all open. That's what I'm just saying. It doesn't mean soft. It doesn't mean hard. It doesn't mean giant club. It doesn't mean little stick. It's very broad. Hebrew words were very broad. So we can't just, assume the best or the worst. And what I mean is obviously it's not beating. It's not trying to injure our child. Because for one, I just can't spank little Johnny. He'll be warped for life. No, if you beat your son with a rod, he won't die. Chill out. So that's one side of that coin. Okay? This is trying to take away the excuses that I can't spank my child. On the other side of that coin, he will not die. There never, ever, ever, ever should be any fear of injuring a child, because we would never be spanking a child in such a way that could hurt them. Hurt means injury, right? Now, could you get a little red, But really, like, I tell my kids, it's like, yeah, even if I go lay into them because they earned it, I don't expect ever to see a bruise. Like, because, it shouldn't take that. Because if you spank a kid on the rear end with an appropriate rod, it really shouldn't leave bruises. So that's just food for thought. If you beat your son with a rod, he will not die. For one, he's not going to die. So chill out and just do some biblical discipline. On the other side of that, like, they should not ever have any fear of injury, because that's actually beating children by the modern definition. Again, the old Hebrew word beat, it's all they had to use. It was just one word, lots of uses. But modern understanding, we don't beat our kids. You never just wail on your kids. In fact, unless there's danger involved, you would never just spank your kids right there in the moment. You always walk somewhere. You talk about it. You get the rod of discipline, which actually prevents beating, because you have a specific tool or a couple things that you use for discipline. So it's not like you're just going to smack your kid. You need to walk to the place where the thing is so that you can use it. There's order in this. Kids understand this. Now, you drive it from them. It doesn't happen all at once. But I'm going to say this. Most parents I know probably don't spank their kids enough. Most parents in the day and age we live, even of those who do spank, probably don't do it enough. And I laugh and chuckle because Vodi Bakum, I quoted this recently, I think, where someone says, oh, well, my little Susie, I've only had to spank her 2 or 3 times before. Or 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever the number. But I just remember Vodi was like, man, 5 or 6 sometimes barely gets us out of bed in the morning. Because you should not wait to the bitter end to spank, to discipline, to have consequences. Children need to be trained. You tell them one time. How many times does God have to say, thou shalt not, in the Bible before you obey him? Christian. Rightly so, right? We all know how oftentimes we need to hear it 1,000 times, but we know God only needs to tell us once. And that's what you're trying to train your kids to do. Only be told once. Now, as I tell my kids, hey, I get it, you're in the flesh, but you disobeyed me. So let's just go. We'll deal with this. I know that it's kind of a small infraction, so you're going to get kind of a small consequence. It'll be proportionate, but you're going to get it. And you're not going to like it, but it's going to get over quickly and we can get back to work. And they're usually like, all right, let's go. And the kids are kind of on board and we come right back. Other times, there's more of an attitude. I will say this. I had this talk with a child just recently. And as we talked about it, I was like, why is it? Do you see this? And I was trying to show this to them so they could observe it in themselves. You've been fighting me and resisting me. And we come in here and you're still fighting and resisting. And we start this discipline off. And you knew if you just obeyed and took the consequence, it could be over. But you still wanted to fight with me. So it continued and continued and continued and continued and continued. And they had no self-control. Absolutely none. They're screaming, they're flailing. And it continued and it continued. And then all of a sudden, they start taking a few deep breaths. They calm down. They lay still. And I'm not done. Because I tell them, like, well, now that you're calm, you can actually get your discipline. And it's all said and done. I talk to them. It's like, tell me, why is it you had no self-control coming in here, but you have self-control now? The rod of correction will drive the foolishness from them. Even my kids get this. These are kids under the age of 10. It makes sense to them. They realize that sometimes they've just got a bad attitude, and sometimes it seems like the only thing we can do is spank it out of them. But it's the reality of it, is that the Bible's right. Go figure, right? That foolishness is just, it's tied up in there sometimes. Some days it's worse than others. And it's like you almost spank it loose and get it out of their system. And some days there's no spankings. Others days, you can barely go 15 minutes without having to address something. But I want to give that final exhortation. If you've been struggling with your kids and you have not been giving them biblical expectations and biblical consequences, please don't go to the world. Please don't go to Uncle Jimmy or your tia and ask, go to the Bible. Start there, because this world is filled with alternatives that are easier. Some parents just hate the idea of spanking their kids, so they go look for something else. Gentle parenting. It's unbiblical. There's a lot of biblical stuff in gentle parenting. May I say that in case you're going down that road? There's some good stuff in there. There is. I listened to a bunch of stuff to try and learn about it. And it's like, it's a combination of good biblical concepts paired with absolutely unbiblical. So you get a little bit of both. There's bone and meat in that, like a bunch of ribs. It's like a lot of bone and there is some good meat. But don't go somewhere for an alternative. Well, I don't like spanking. Well, too bad. Too bad. God has commanded me to do a whole lot of things I'm not a fan of. It's not my natural inclination, but I do it because God told me so. And I'm going to go down the last road, which is, again, so many kids have never been biblically disciplined, and parents think there's something wrong with them. I'm like, yeah, there's something wrong with your kids. There is something wrong with your kids. They're sinners, and they've never been dealt with. That's what's wrong with your kids. Faithfully train and raise and discipline your children before you start going down any other road and start asking the doctor, what's wrong with my child? Can you give them something? You know what you're asking for? You're asking for an alternative to being a real parent. Yeah, I said it. I'm not saying that there aren't kids with medical conditions that need to be addressed. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, and you know it's true, that 99% of Americans would rather take a pill to lose weight than diet and exercise, because diet and exercise is hard. Most Americans want the quick fix. That's just how we're wired. I think it's how Satan has a grip on this country, is we just don't want to do work anymore. We want a quick fix. We want the government to do everything for us. We want other people to do this for us. We want quick fixes. But the reality is, your marriage and your kids are never going to be quick fixes. They're always going to be long-term investments that you must pour your life into if you want to see the results you want. All right. Enough for me for now. So, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from him. Tattoo that on your forearm if you need to. You need to remember that. You need to obey God's word and be the type of parent, grandparent, child that he's called you to be. All right. You guys take care. Today's Friday. I'll see you on Monday or Sunday if you're at church.